Gezond en wel over leven in balans.
Dit is Argezoog Radio.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Healthy and Well with your host Desiree Röver, a radio station on the internet from the Netherlands. And my guest, I'm very proud to say today, is Leuren Moret. Hello, Leuren.
Hello, Desiree. Very, very nice to be on your program. And I know this is going to be a really lively interview. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, me too. We are going to have fun with a subject that is not funny at all, actually. But yes. We at Argezoog Radio did a team program about Chernobyl because on the 26th of April, that was 25 years ago that Chernobyl happened in 1986. And little did we know when we planned that program that Fukushima would happen. And by way of what happened in Fukushima, I came across your research again, because I had read about things that you had written before, but now it all became very to the point, because actually you wrote an article in 2004 which somewhat foreshadowed what has happened in Fukushima. Isn't that right, Leuren?
Yes, that's correct, and it was called Japan's Deadly Game of Nuclear Roulette. And I actually had campaigned in Japan with a friend who was running for city council in a town in the larger Tokyo area called Matsudo. And we campaigned at the Matsudo train station for about 5 days, and my friend Mari Takanuchi had run for city council for the sole purpose of having a platform to warn the Japanese about the extreme danger of nuclear power plants and large earthquakes in Japan, because she said we have a magnitude 8 or greater earthquake in Japan every 5 years. And I am a geoscientist. I love plate tectonics, which is the movement and the dynamic of the continental plates moving around the planet over a very, very long time, billions of years, and the oceanic plates which interact with the continental plates. And Japan is sitting on the junction of 4 plates. The Philippine plate is moving north under Japan. The Pacific plate is moving west into Japan. The North American plate is moving south towards Japan. And Japan is just sitting on the edge of the China plate, the Asian plate, and eventually will be plastered onto the continental margin of China or subducted under the Asian plate. So Japan is in one of the most tectonically dynamic areas of the world, and it's complete insanity to have any nuclear technologies as dangerous as nuclear power in a country that is in such a dynamic tectonic setting.
Yes, I loved your way of putting it, that it is as if there are 4 wild swine fighting with each other in a gunny sack and you are trying to stand upright on top of it.
That's just what Japan is doing.
Yeah. Very good picture.
You're right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember that from reading books like Shogun, I think, was that Michener or was that another author?
That was Michener.
That was Michener, yeah. And
yes.
he wrote about all the earthquakes that were happening there, that suddenly the earth burst open and people would be swallowed and that sort of thing. And yeah, well, living here in Holland, we have a different danger from nature. We live beneath sea level, and we don't notice usually until it's too late, of course. And the same goes for Japan. But what happens now in Japan, I saw that water is coming up from beneath the pavement, and pavement is breaking, and all these little YouTube movies where people show what is happening right there. It's very working, very busy there, tectonic.
Well,
spoken.
yes, and I understand it very well because we are exactly the mirror of that tectonic setting on the opposite side of the Pacific oceanic plate here in California. And we have a huge fault, the San Andreas fault that begins down in Mexico, Baja, California, and it's moved these microplates or small pieces of continent like boxcars from Baja or kind of this area of Central America all the way along the Pacific coastline of North America, all the way up to Alaska, where these small pieces of plate material have piled up like a log jam because there's nowhere else for them to go. And they have accreted into what we call Alaska. And so these are actually how continents are made. Smaller continental pieces, like pieces of a puzzle, are moved through this tectonic dynamic. This is all over the world, and they get plastered onto places that and build larger and larger continental areas. So here we are in California, San Francisco, exactly opposite Fukushima, and we have two nuclear power plants in California. One is at Diablo Canyon, north of Los Angeles, and the other one is south of Los Angeles, called San Onofre, just a little bit north of San Diego. And Diablo Canyon is sitting on the San Andreas Fault, the most dangerous fault in the United States. So eventually, Fukushima-type disaster could happen very easily in California. And I forgot what your question was.
I forgot also. We were just talking about what the...
the water and everything. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yes, and we also have that situation here in the San Francisco Bay Area because we had a very large earthquake 10 or 15 years ago, and maybe 20 years ago, and it was called the Loma Prieta earthquake, and it's now believed actually that the Navy triggered that earthquake with HAARP. And it was one of their early tests before they really went fully operational officially with HAARP. And the areas of San Francisco Bay, and some of them are very, very expensive real estate with very expensive homes, had similar things happen because where there is landfill, this is area that is actually underwater, but greedy real estate developers and politicians and so forth allow loose dirt and earth material to fill in the bay so that housing can be built on that at great profit. Now, when an earthquake happens, I mean, they should never allow any landfill like that in such a dynamic environment as the California environment along the coastline, because when that earthquake begins to release the energy that's locked up and creates an enormous stress, the energy waves liquefy the landfill. In other words, it's like putting mud into a wearing blender and trying to stand on top of that, because all the particles are moving and it makes like a quicksand, which anything that stands on it or is built on it just sinks into the ground. And because that ground is no longer solid, it's being liquefied, or the particles are dancing around independent of each other, so there's no physical strength to support whatever is sitting on that liquefied material.
Yeah, so yes, you're literally on quicksand, yeah.
You're on quicksand, and so in a complex tectonic setting with enormous faulting at different depths, such as under Japan, you have one huge earthquake like the Fukushima earthquake, and there's never been a magnitude 9.1 earthquake in Japan in recorded history, or since they have been keeping records, I mean. And that's a very, very unusual earthquake. And what happens is that earthquake is part of a larger system that is made up of many systems. And so when you shift one, and that 9.1 earthquake, or a 9.0 earthquake, releases the energy equivalent to 1,030,000 kiloton Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. And that creates shock waves and earthquake waves, and it also disturbs the very fragile and tenuous balance of all these interlocking fractured zones and earthquake planes and fault lines and everything. So for probably up to at least a year, there will continue to be large aftershocks as all of the other parts in that fractured zone adjust to the change caused by that 9.1 earthquake on March 11th.
Whoa, yeah.
And that's why the streets and sidewalks are cracking in Tokyo and water's welling up, because that's all landfill in Tokyo Bay.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, you mentioned HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, the antenna array in Alaska and other places in the world. We can talk about that later. It's definitely on my list of subjects. I see it's not in the list that I gave you, but oh yeah, use of HAARP.
Yes, it
was. Yeah.
And I just like to make a quote. I'd like to read a quote just to introduce the public to this this new weapon of mass destruction that was co-developed during the Cold War secretly by the Soviet Union with the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab, where I am a whistleblower. And it's very clear now, the evidence is very clear, that HAARP was co-developed by the good old friends, the friendship of the U.S. and Russia. So the Soviets came to the Livermore lab in California and worked on it there. And they also, U.S. scientists, went to Russia with money, with a 40-ton magnet, with all kinds of equipment, and they worked secretly in the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So all of these major countries and intelligence interests and the military have, it's all pretend enemies to justify these continuous wars, which the bankers fund, and that is the main source of their profits. So most of the countries that we're watching all these wars in are actually pretend enemies to fool the public into supporting these nonsense wars. And it's really stealing the product of the labor of the global population. And we're being denied a much higher quality of life, peace and justice and the ability of countries to flourish and come up with better ideas and to benefit the citizenry of the world instead of having it all stolen and plundered by these shadow bankers and financial interests who are engineering all these wars. So Claudia von Werloff, professor of political sciences and women's studies at Innsbruck, Austria, recently said, quote, "We have discovered that the military in the East and West has developed new technologies which could attack the planet and transform it into a weapon itself. This technological process is by no means controlled by the public. Moreover, these technologies can be used everywhere on the planet as plasma weapons, weather wars, and geoengineering." Dr. Werloff observes that under neoliberal economic policy, quote, "social, cultural, traditional, and ecological considerations are abandoned and give way to a mentality of plundering. All global resources that we still have, forests, water, genetic pools, have turned into objects of utilization. Rapid ecological destruction through depletion is the consequence," unquote. And the very Jason scientist who developed the tectonic warfare program for HAARP application, his name is Dr. Gordon MacDonald. He was a very, very good geophysicist. He wrote a chapter in 1964, How to Wreck the Environment, and the category of that chapter was geophysical warfare. This is in a very interesting book called Unless Peace Comes, a scientific forecast of new weapons, edited by Nigel Calder. And the date, it's 1968. And this is a very, very interesting book because people from all over the world, Pakistan, France, Yugoslavia, United Kingdom, U.S., Sweden, and a lot of them from Britain, I actually contributed chapters warning about the weapons that were being developed during the Cold War, which we see now the effects of the applications. And the Fukushima disaster is certainly one that would have upset Gordon MacDonald if he were alive today. And yet he was one of the creators, knowing full well what the potential damage could be. He participated in creating this horrific weapon.
Yes, I know about this because I have listened to other interviews with you, and I put this information into a column that I have written for a magazine that goes to doctors and therapists. And I'm very sure that what is in that article, in that column, that these doctors and therapists in Holland, they haven't got a clue. So
they don't.
Yeah,
they don't. And
yeah.
Certainly in the United States, and probably in most countries, the military completely controls the medical profession in order to protect the nuclear weapons and nuclear power programs, as well as other nuclear technologies. And that even includes radiation, ionizing radiation that is used in medical technologies, because that too is not safe. Every time you're exposed, a person is exposed to ionizing radiation, it has a cumulative effect, and the effect never goes away. So as you have more X-rays, as you have radioactive contaminated food you're ingesting, dairy products and drinking water are the main pathways for radiation into your body. This accumulates and continues to damage the body and the system of the body, which is a system of many systems. And they are interdependent, they're interconnected, they're synchronized to perform as a whole, but they are very, very, in a very delicate balance, and even just one single atom of uranium or plutonium under the right conditions can cause cancer. So this is a very, very, very deadly technology, and what you're doing is basically our bodies are a bag of water, and when an atom of uranium or plutonium ejects a particle or a ray from the nucleus, an alpha particle, a beta ray, or a gamma ray, or sometimes X-rays, you're actually unraveling a supernova. The energy that was packed into the nucleus of that plutonium atom or that uranium atom occurred in extremely dynamic star processes such as supernovas. So you're really unraveling a supernova in a cell or maybe 80 cells. It depends on the energy of the particle or ray. And so you're just nuking your own body, or your body's being nuked.
Yes, and the trouble with that doctors don't know about this is that, and I heard that, I picked that up from a interview between Carl Grossman and Janet Sherman, that in 1959 there was a treaty made between the World Health Organization, as I call them, and the International Atomic Energy Agency. And this treaty, or this agreement, was about that neither of them would publish an article without the consent of the other. So that is why what you are saying, the information that you are given, what nuclear energy does in our bodies, is not known by the most of the doctors, and let alone that it is known by the public.
Well, there you have another example of collusion to delude or to create delusion about the horrific truth about these technologies. And I'd like to quote also Confucius. He said, he warned that defective language produces flawed meaning. And so this is deliberate deception about the terrible danger of ionizing radiation to the public at the very top and throughout the entire global nuclear establishment. For instance,
who has twisted the nuclear establishment? What is the history of that, and who are they?
The earliest radiation pioneers were people like Röntgen, Marie Curie, and Pierre Curie. There were many, many researchers, and even Marie Curie, I mean, they didn't know what the biological effects were, and many of them died from radiation exposure. And I have an image, I'll send it to you to post on your website. It's the hand, the amputated hand of Marie Curie, which was amputated a year before she died of cancer, which was all over her body. And that famous hand had already had 2 fingers amputated, and it was covered with tumors even before she died, before it was amputated. And that hand won 2 Nobel Prizes for the discovery of uranium, some of the uranium isotopes or decay products. Polonium was one of them, which Marie Curie named for her home country of Poland. So these were some of the pioneers. Now, in the 1930s, this really came out of a desire to release the energy from the nucleus of radioactive isotopes. And isotopes are their elements that have more energy and excessive energy in the nucleus. For instance, there's non-radioactive iodine. That means the nucleus has a balanced regime of energy in it. It's stable. But there are isotopes of iodine, such as 131 and 134, that are radioactive because they have an imbalance of energy in the nucleus, and eventually that extra energy will be ejected as an alpha particle, a beta ray, or a gamma ray. And so people knew, that the research scientists knew, that this was a tremendous amount of energy, and if they could find ways to release it, these mostly, usually science is weaponized to be used against the public. And so some people who were active in experimental physics had in mind that they could make weapons out of that if they could find a way to control the release of that energy. So the first weapons that were developed to release a shock wave to destroy things, that was chemical energy, which the Chinese were discovered when they produced gunpowder. Now, they used it mostly for celebrations, and sometimes they would throw a bomb with gunpowder in it to scare the enemy, but they were not as malicious and malevolent as the leaders that we have today. Actually, we're living under a totalitarian scientific oligarchy, and it's mostly controlled by people who are sociopaths to psychopaths. It's a spectrum, and many of them are very narcissistic. So they have, they're happy to build big bombs that kill lots of people because it satisfies their character defect. Edward Teller is one of the best examples. That's why he's called Dr. Strangelove. So after chemical energy was used to create chemical materials that would release shock waves, then the next weapon to develop was the shock waves, or weaponized would be shock waves that could be released through nuclear materials. And that started in the 1930s. Ernest Lawrence was a young physicist at Princeton University, which is the big CIA headquarters, and he was hired by the University of California to come out and start an experimental physics program. And this was the beginning of big science, where teams of people would work together with very large experimental equipment funded by only a government could afford to do that. So he came out and began experimenting, and he had students and research students and other scientists collaborating at the Lawrence Berkeley lab. And they had a cyclotron, and they were looking for subatomic particles. They were studying the atom and all parts of the atom. And then he began concentrating uranium, the fissionable isotope of uranium, uranium-235, with this cyclotron, and that was the beginning of the weaponization of nuclear materials for the atomic bomb project in World War II. And there were many, many centers in the United States that were isolated from each other, but they were all working on the project. Up in Niagara Falls, there was a big operation there, New York City, and the Manhattan Project was really a reference to the Wall Street bankers who would be the beneficiaries, and Wall Street is part of Manhattan. They would be the beneficiaries of this new weapon of mass destruction. And the truth is, Desiree, that weapons of mass destruction are made for the benefit of the bankers and utilized solely for that purpose.
Yes, and then the banksters, then we talk about Rothschild, Rockefeller, and that sort of people.
That's right.
And
but now, the uranium, which started all of this, belongs, almost all of it, much of it belongs to the Queen of England.
Yes,
it's her personal wealth as a sovereign ruler. And she owns the mineral rights to 27 countries, to the British Isles, and to other territories that are part of the Commonwealth. And she also owns the mineral rights offshore out to the 200-mile international limit.
Yes, well.
She's the richest person in the world, and she could bulldoze the entire British Isles into the ocean, and she would never even miss it. She's that wealthy.
Yeah, well.
Now, the Rothschilds, they control uranium prices and uranium supplies for the Queen of England. Uranium is simply worthless dust unless you can sell it for nuclear fuel or to make nuclear bombs. And so the nuclear power industry was an outgrowth of the Manhattan Project, and now we see with the disaster at Fukushima that it's actually another form, a new form of nuclear tectonic warfare against the innocent citizens of not just Japan, but the results, the global effects from Fukushima will emerge over the next 100 years. And the ocean currents and atmospheric circulation will expose everyone on this planet, every living thing, to the Fukushima radiation.
Yes, and what I understood is that HAARP was used to make sure that most of the fallout from Fukushima would rain down on the west coast of the United States.
North America.
Yeah, North America.
It's contaminating. It's contaminating the whole northern Pacific. It's contaminating the Arctic Ocean. It's contaminating the Northwest Territories and Canada, the United States, Mexico, and the coastal current from north to south along the west coast of North America is carrying that radiation out to Hawaii. And they have actually higher levels of iodine-131 now reported since March 11th than the west coast of North America.
Oh, wow.
And what this international establishment is, not only the Queen with all her uranium and the London bankers selling and peddling it around the world, but then you have the international agencies that are set up to cover it up and hide the effects from the public. And that is the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and they're headquartered in Vienna. The Habsburg Empire was a Zionist empire, so that tradition, the IAEA, fits in with their Zionist tradition. The WHO and
Yeah.
NATO, and what else is headquartered in Belgium? NATO and the WHO.
The European Union.
The European Union, and Belgium is controlled by the Lambert family. They are cousins of the Rothschilds. And the ICRP, International Committee on Radiation Protection, I'm not sure where that's headquartered, but it is in Europe, and that's under the IAEA, and that is set up to hide the biological and environmental effects of radiation, and their standards are based on the fraudulently conducted U.S. government studies in Japan of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors. And in 1990, when I was a staff scientist at the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab, which is about 45 minutes southeast of the San Francisco Bay Area, I walked into a room in the environmental department, and I saw these cores of from drilling into building materials and roads and stuff, lying on a table, and I said, "What are those cores? What are those rock cores from?" And they said, "Oh, those are from Hiroshima and Nagasaki." And I said, "Why'd you go and get those?" They said, "We go every 3 months. We've gone every 3 months since World War II to collect materials because Hiroshima and Nagasaki are still radioactive, and so are all the people. We're studying them too." That was in 1990. They were so casual about it.
Yeah, well, I have a little saying that goes like this: when the head is not connected to the heart, the hands and feet can do the most atrocious things.
Yes, and so we see also the nuclear power industry is actually headquartered in France, but it's the City of London bankers who own and control it globally. And although the Rockefellers are the secret owners of General Electric and Westinghouse, and 85% of the commercial reactors around the world are built on GE and Westinghouse designs, it's probably the City of London who actually owns GE and Westinghouse ultimately. Now, how do we know that the Queen of England owns most of the uranium? The way we know that is that Dr. Jay Gould, who I've worked with on the Radiation and Public Health Project, although unfortunately he passed away, but we collected baby teeth 6,000 baby teeth from children living around nuclear power plants in the United States, in England, and I went to Japan and did it. And he was hired by, I believe it was Westinghouse, one of the nuclear power companies, to investigate during the 1973 oil crisis why uranium prices were suddenly going up. And that was of great concern because GE and Westinghouse, when they sold reactors to different countries, they guaranteed the price of the nuclear fuel so that the countries would not suffer fluctuation and manipulation of nuclear fuel prices. And so it was Westinghouse and General Electric who had to pay for that extra profit when uranium prices increased. And so Jay Gould investigated for some time. He had his own office and everything. And one day he picked up the phone and he called Westinghouse headquarters and he said, well, the uranium prices are going up because the Rothschilds control prices and supplies, but it's the Queen of England who owns all the uranium. So the headquarters called him back the next day and said, pack up everything in your office, ship it to us, we'll send you a check, thank you very much. And in order to avoid international embarrassment and exposure that the greed of the Queen had raised the uranium prices and that she owned the uranium, she simply settled quietly out of court.
Yeah. You know, I see a lot of parallels with what I see happening in the medical arena, and that is because it is the same players behind all these.
It's all the same players, and all of these international agencies that are tied to the nuclear establishment, they all have ties to the City of London and the Queen of England. So it's no surprise, really, what's happening now.
No, that's true.
It's a terrible global tragedy. It's the worst tragedy in the history of the world. We've gone through many natural extinctions, from comets and asteroids impacting the planet, from changes in climate, from changes in the atmospheric gases. But these have all been natural events and part of the dynamic of evolution. And they actually drive evolution. Actually, uranium, which occurs in the environment, is one of the main contributors to evolution. And so...
In what way is that? Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, well, evolution is actually the response of living organisms to changes in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Climate change, or as I mentioned, changes in the composition of the gases in the atmosphere. And so when you have evolution, to make it possible, you have to have variation in the genetic composition of living organisms on the planet. And that genetic variation is caused primarily by natural background radiation. It's solar radiation, the solar wind coming into the planetary environment, the environment of the Earth. But it's also the radioactive materials that naturally occur in minerals, and through sedimentary processes, these minerals and rocks and mountain ranges are broken down into tinier and tinier pieces, and they end up in streams and lakes and the oceans eventually. But in moving water, or in bodies of water, the radioactive particles attach to clay particles, where they're eventually washed up on mud flats or river banks or coastlines, lofted into the air, and then living organisms are exposed to that radiation. Now, before man-made radiation was released into the environment around 1900, naturally occurring radiation was actually reported, the effects in England from a cancer registry between 1850 and 1860. And there were over 6,000 cases of cancer in Cumbria, England, which is north of Wales on the west coast of England. And the 50% of the cancers were breast cancer and uterine cancer, ovarian cancer. So this is cancer in women. And very recently it was discovered or reported that uranium is also a chemical. It has a chemical effect, a radiological effect, and a nanoparticle effect. And the chemical effect, one of the chemical effects of uranium, is that it is a hormone and estrogen disruptor. And therefore, it causes changes in females that induce breast cancer, uterine and ovarian cancer, but it also causes infertility in women and in men. So it's a very, very pernicious poison, and it also causes the variation, as I just mentioned, that makes evolution and natural selection possible.
Whoa, yes, that's a whole string of events there. That's very interesting. I never heard that before. Thank you very much for that enlightenment.
Yes.
So yes, I heard also something that these clays are being used in products for cosmetics, like facial powders or something like that, because these clays can make an even surface on the face and an even color, and that is why women also have another exposure to that or uranium, possibly.
Yes, that's correct. That's absolutely correct. Now, I was the president of the Association for Women Geoscientists. It's an international organization that we set up to train women scientists, and this is a global organization, to train women geoscientists in leadership skills. And we also would help women who were having difficulty completing their PhD thesis. We would take them to a motel room and lock them in there and stay there with them until they finished writing their thesis. And so it really did help women get through the barriers that women scientists face in the United States, because only 3% of scientists in the U.S. are women. And so we did workshops, and we worked a lot with young women and high school girls, and we did programs to take girls who never would have gone to college and start training them in high school in science. And then we had tremendous success getting them into college and universities, and then making sure they graduated. So one of the workshops that I used to do with these young women was called, "What Mineral Are You Wearing?" and most cosmetics are made out of minerals. So you grind up azurite to make blue eyeshadow. You grind up certain kinds of mica to make the frosted look, an eyeshadow or cheek blush or lipstick or nail polish. And so I would have all these minerals sitting on the table, and the bottle of cosmetic or the compact or whatever sitting there. And it was really funny, Desiree, because half of the girls would come in with so much heavy makeup on it looked like they'd put it on with a trowel. Well, they were only 14 or 15 or 16 years old, and they had no idea how to wear it. And they also had no idea that they were much more beautiful just in their clean, natural faces than after they put all this stuff on.
Yeah, that's what advertising does for you.
Yes, and then the other half of the girls would never touch that stuff. They never would put any of that gunk on their faces or waste their money on it. But they still came to the workshop and wanted to they were just as interested as the girls who were caked up and made up. Yes, that is correct. That uranium is in it can be in facial products, in cosmetics, and even worse, I discovered from a lecture at the International World Conference on Depleted Uranium Weapons in Hamburg, Germany in October of 2003. And their website has all of the speakers, and people can watch the video clips of each talk. But an Italian woman came. She was an experimental nuclear physicist in Italy, and she was working at the University of Modena on investigating the biological response to materials that were introduced to the body in prostheses or artificial components such as dental porcelain.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so she reported that wherever she found detritus from dental porcelain. This is artificial teeth that are made in a dentist's office from phosphate powder, and then they're glued into the mouth, attached to partial teeth. And she reported that wherever she found tumors in people, cancerous tumors, who had dental porcelain in their mouths, she always found a piece of dental porcelain detritus, a broken piece, in the center of that tumor. And I said, well, no wonder, because phosphate is mined for uranium, and the tailings are made into dental porcelain and also dumped into fertilizer bags and sprayed from airplanes all over our crops and fields, which is horrible, because 85% of the uranium in the ore, the phosphate ore, is dumped into the fertilizer bag. And so I also discovered that not only is dental porcelain made from phosphate that's loaded with uranium, but they deliberately add uranium in the tooth laboratory, the dental laboratory, to make the porcelain whiter.
Yeah. Well, I think you would find it very interesting to listen to my program with Hal Huggins, a dentist who never told this story, but who said a lot of other things about dental materials that are very carcinogenic and dangerous. Yeah, so I'm not surprised with it, but the explanation, thank you so much for that, well, the clear explanation that you just gave.
And not only that, the beautiful granite countertops that women love in their kitchens and their bathrooms, those are so radioactive and so loaded with uranium in the minerals in granite that you can actually put a Geiger counter on it and get a fairly robust reading. Now, people are preparing their food, they're cutting up food and mixing it on these counters. They're exposed to it every day. It's emitting alpha, beta, gamma all day long and all night long. And what about the stonemasons who cut that material and polish it? They're inhaling all that radioactive dust too. So there are many things that people are not aware of that are sources of radiation exposure in their daily life, including in glazes on pottery, the very, very orange color that people liked in the 1950s and 60s in the United States was made with uranium minerals that would give that beautiful orange color to the pottery, and it was called Fiesta ware. Well, when that was discovered, they changed the formula and they quit using uranium minerals to color that porcelain or that glaze on the pottery. But there are many other sources of radiation that people are not aware of in their daily lives.
Yes, I realize often that I still don't ask enough questions for myself about the things that I'm living with and have around me. Because, yeah, every other day I find out something like you're telling me that, hey, wait a minute, you take this for granted, but there's another side to it that you never thought about. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
It reminds me of what I tell to people when they ask me what the right sort of food is, and then I tell them, well, you go to the shop and you take your great-great-grandmother with you, and everything that she does not understand, you leave on the shelf.
Oh, that's great! Oh, that's hilarious. You're right.
Yeah. Because all the other stuff, people have done things with it that you don't know about, and well, I don't trust people because if I'm critical of myself about not thinking enough, I know that other people are not critical about that at all towards themselves. So they don't realize, they don't even think of the question whether something is okay or not. So
well, they're not aware. They're not educated on that particular topic, and having a program like this today that you so generously invited me to speak on is a real service to the public, because even scientists who are working in these areas, they're not even aware.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, well, you said something earlier about that there were in different laboratories people working on the same subject. That is the pyramid construction. All these people underneath in the pyramid are working on pieces of the whole without knowing that they are contributing to something bigger than what they can see. And then
That was, yes.
and then someone up in the pyramid puts it all together at a certain moment of time, and then all of a sudden you have the atomic bomb, things like that.
That's correct, because the information is all there. It's compartmentalized so that we cannot put those pieces of disconnected information together. We have no idea how to relate those disconnected pieces, and we don't even know they're all connected and make a bigger picture that is actually contributing to the genocide globally of every living thing.
Yes. Well, in that sense, it might be interesting for you to take a look at the NATO books. NATO has workshops all over the place. For years they have done that on niche subjects and the strangest things. But for instance, in the medical arena, Patrick Jordan found out about the book, the NATO book, The Biology of Aggression.
Aha!
It's a workshop, has been a workshop in France or in Greece or something, and all the people who attended the workshop and who were speakers at the workshop, they put together their papers, and that is in this book. And from that book you can see, it's from 1981 or something, you can see that at that time what they were working on, and basically it is mind control programs that they were putting together, from putting electrodes into brains to radiologically control a steer, for instance, to where we are now, that they don't even have to put in a chip and they can already have us jump around or be pressed or whatever.
I'm quite aware of that, because I went to UC Davis in the 60s, the University of California at Davis. It was basically an agricultural school then, and there was a very large monkey colony out in the peach orchards, some distance from the campus. Nobody really knew what they were doing, but students who worked there part-time occasionally would talk about the monkeys there had the top of their heads cut off, and they had wires, antennas coming out of their brains. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago when I was contacted, actually by the GE General Electric inspector who inspected Fukushima in 2002 and told the governor they were putting plutonium fuel into it. They went on television and stopped it, and my friend, his name is Kei Sugaoka, he's actually Japanese-American, he shut down all of the TEPCO reactors for a year. His exposure of their falsified safety documents ended up impacting that industry very severely. But anyway, he contacted me and said, I have a friend named Dave Sylvie who is writing a book about an MK Ultra program. That's the CIA mind control program that was also developed jointly with the Soviet Union and Britain. And he said, my friend is writing a book about Project Artichoke. He was kidnapped when he was 8 and taken into the Project Artichoke program, and he wants to know if you would help him write his book. And I said, tell him to come over with all of his documentation. I will look at it, and if it's solid, I would be very interested in helping him write the book, because I'm already researching that topic because I worked at Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab, and also I was a student at UC Davis. And I knew about that monkey colony. So he came over, I looked at everything, and I said, oh my God, you have all the documentation. It's absolutely solid. You are an authentic voice. You were actually a participant in this secret program, and it's devastated your life. And I would love to help you to write something that would inform the public about what our government has really been involved in. So what I discovered was that monkey colony is where they did the animal studies for mind control for HAARP, and I began wondering who the decision makers were, the main decision makers in the scientific community in the United States, who guided these policies and supported them and also hid them and funded them. And so Vannevar Bush was the head of the scientific effort in World War II, so I started searching him, and guess what, Desiree? He was a Rockefeller contractor. Then I said, well, Edward Teller, what about him? I discovered that when he was a student in Hungary, a physics student, he received a Rockefeller grant. And then later he received a Rockefeller fellowship to go to the Niels Bohr Institute for 1 year in Denmark, and then come to the United States, where he had a golden helicopter ride right to the top of the scientific establishment. And he was one of the main architects of mind control and HAARP at the Livermore lab. Now, he loved UC Davis, and there's even a mini UC Davis campus on the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab property. So there's a very close association. I began investigating that, and I found a picture. When I started Googling, then I started doing a Google search on each influential scientist, their name, and Rockefeller, and I discovered a photograph of Edward Teller in 1964 at the dedication of the Applied Science Facility at UC Davis, and standing right beside him was Nelson Rockefeller, the Vice President of the United States. So yeah. There was Teller, there was Vannevar Bush, and then I said, well, what about James Conant, who developed poison gas in World War I, and he is the creator of depleted uranium poison gas weapons in World War II. And depleted uranium under the Manhattan Project was to be developed as dirty bombs, dirty missiles, and dirty bullets. In other words, poison gas weapons, because uranium is a metal that catches on fire. It's pyrophoric, and it burns at extremely high temperatures, 5,000 degrees centigrade, which is the temperature of the sun. And that makes very, very tiny particles. And basically that's what's being released from Fukushima. These are nanoparticles of not only uranium, but also the plutonium in the fuel, the MOX fuel in Unit 3, and also the fission products, which are left over in the fuel rods after the fuel burns, or the uranium fissions and releases heat to boil water. And Einstein even said, nuclear power, that's a hell of a way to boil water. Yeah. So that water, the steam, is what they use to turn the turbines. So anyway, then I began to find more pieces, and it took me 5 years to discover that Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab, where I had worked, was the secret partner with the Soviet scientists and the Soviet team to develop the HAARP antenna, to develop global mind control, and they did it together. And the safe house where poor Dave Sylvie was kidnapped and taken when he was 8 years old to do mind control experiments, that safe house was in Livermore.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
And so it's UC Berkeley, Stanford, and the Lawrence Livermore Lab. They're all in the Bay Area, and that is the triangle of the MK Ultra development of social control through mind control.
Yeah. Yeah, I have found bits and pieces of that, but not as deeply and extensively as you have done.
Well, guess what? Stephen Koonin, Dr. Stephen Koonin, who is Undersecretary of Science for Science at the U.S. Department of Energy, he was a BP scientist with a very interesting background, including time at the Niels Bohr Laboratory in Denmark, and he was on the Trilateral Commission, which Japan is a very large player on that. That's a Rockefeller creation.
Yeah.
And he is now on the Council on Foreign Relations. He's very, very deep CIA, and he was also a BP scientist. So he and Dr. Stephen Chu, who came from Stanford after he won the Nobel Prize, then he went to the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, which is where the Manhattan Project started, and there he received $500 million from BP, British Petroleum, to set up a research park on alternative energies. And then Stephen Chu immediately appointed him as an Undersecretary for Science in the Department of Energy in May of 2009, right after Obama came into office. Obama is third generation CIA. So here we now have BP, the Department of Energy, and the Rothschild Nobel Prize all together running, overseeing the Fukushima disaster for the United States government and the BP disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. And so basically those two disasters have completely poisoned the coastlines and the populations on the east coast of North America and on the west coast of North America.
Yeah. I agree totally. I have been digging into the BP disaster as well very deeply, and yeah, a lot of what you were saying I knew already, but yeah, what a world we are living in. I think...
And not only that, well, it's great because all the doctors and the medical professionals, they have job security for not just their careers, but for many, many generations.
Oh, yeah.
And they need to know about this because they're going to be facing it every day. And not only that, the Corexit, which is the chemical BP insisted on using, which is extremely toxic, is going to be poisoning the whole Gulf region and the Caribbean and all the way up the Atlantic coastline of North America into the Arctic, and that will interact with the radiation that is coming across the United States, across North America from Fukushima, and they will interact synergistically. In other words, they will be multiplying the effects of each other. So chemicals and radiation are not 1 + 1 = 2. It's something like 3 × 5 = 15.
Yes, I agree. And I expect to see a lot of polio coming in because I know that polio can be created by chemicals and radiation. So
well,
that's going to be interesting.
The damage that is caused by internal radiation exposure is especially bad with uranium. And the uranium and phosphate, as I mentioned, occur in deposits in the natural world, but it's because they have a tremendous chemical affinity for each other. And in the body, the DNA, or the core of the DNA, it's called the histone, and the mitochondria, which provide all of the energy for the body, are also loaded with phosphate. So the mitochondria and the DNA are disproportionately affected by uranium, which has a tremendous chemical affinity, and so it goes and sticks to the phosphate in the DNA and the mitochondria. And some of the diseases that are caused by damage to the mitochondria are chronic fatigue syndrome, where you don't have enough energy to really operate properly as a healthy person, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's, Hodgkin's, Alzheimer's disease, and those are damage to the mitochondria. Now, because the heart and the brain use more energy than any other organ in the body, and the cells in the heart and the brain are 50% mitochondria, and mitochondria have RNA and DNA, so that is also damaged by the radiation effects. And so what you see right after Hiroshima and Nagasaki globally is a very large increase in deaths from heart disease and brain disease. And we're going to see this from Fukushima, not just in North America, but it will be global. And there's going to be a large increase in diseases that begin to increase with nuclear bomb testing, increased with the introduction of nuclear power plants, and now we have the Fukushima disaster, which also, there's a lot of uranium in those fuel rods as well, and so the diseases from the uranium exposure and contamination, internal contamination, will be more like Gulf War syndrome that has been reported in veterans of these uranium wars in Iraq, Yugoslavia, and Afghanistan. And the fission product damage will be large increases and mortality from diseases that were reported during nuclear bomb testing and around nuclear power plants.
Yeah, well, some world is this. I mean, these people who cause this disastrous type of events, well, you said they are psychopathic. They must be, because in your right mind you wouldn't dream of doing a thing like this to the planet and to the people. Well, I think that we have the first hour already behind us, Leuren. I think it's a good idea to listen to a little piece of music, to have a little pause for a cup of tea and some bite. We're going to listen to Celestial Ian Project with Hymn of Twilight. Yes, dear ladies and gentlemen, listeners, here I am again, Desiree Röver, your host in Healthy and Well on argusoakradio.org. And I am having a very interesting conversation with Leuren Moret, a nuclear whistleblower, and she has a vast knowledge of the background of the areas that she is warning us for, that things are not the way they seem, and things like Fukushima are far worse and far more deeply going into our everyday life than most of us think will happen. Leuren, we were speaking in the break about spirituality. You said something that Nick Begich had said. Could you please repeat that for the listeners, because I think that is a very crucial point.
Yes. Nick Begich is actually the son of a former member of Congress, and he lives in Alaska. And because he lives in Alaska and because his parents were involved in the U.S. government, he's much more aware than most people. And for that reason, he began investigating the HAARP project in Alaska at the very beginning when they were constructing it. And He's been a very good researcher, and he wrote a book, Angels Don't Play This HAARP, and he's very, very knowledgeable, and I was talking to him a few years ago, and we were talking about HAARP, and I said, what is it really for? Or I was proposing what it was for. He said, you know, I think the real target of HAARP is human spirituality. And I had to think about it. And I thought about Martin Luther King and some of the things that he said about spirituality and the war machine. And he said, no military can defeat human spirituality. And I began to realize that Nick Begich was right. The real target they're using HAARP for is to attack human spirituality. Now, the French writer Albert Camus said, little changes in this world. The struggle for power between elites and the people never seems to end. The people are constantly betrayed by false and greedy leaders. Greek historians tell us that when the aristocrats in certain Hellenic cities took up their posts, they were required to swear an oath always to blacken the name of the people. This 2,000-year-old principle relied on methods that the French philosopher Quesnel described, and we are witnessing in operation today. And that's from Camus' book, Camus at Combat. Now, revolutionary oligarchs who acquire total power and hate the people, as we clearly see the Bush administration, the George H.W. Bush administration, the Clinton administration, we know that these people will use their power to kill the people, the global population, the global citizenry, and use force, any kind of force, ruthlessly to bring them under their control. But there's nothing new about that at all. That is the eternal struggle between the divine right to rule, which we call monarchy, and the push for self-determination or democratic movements that arise in people periodically around the world. And never have we been as attacked with such lethal weapons as they have now to use against us. And they are most definitely carrying out a global depopulation agenda, which is fully underway. It's a doomsday machine with this whole global pollution, with very, very pernicious, indiscriminate, radioactive, invisible, poison gas particles that are incorporated in atmospheric dust. And within 2.5 months, the depleted uranium weapons floating up from the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan, and also used in Yugoslavia, and the fission products that are being emitted every day in dumped into the ocean, leaking into the ocean, and also released into the atmosphere. This is going to have a horrendous, devastating effect on fertility globally, on mortality globally. It's genocide, it's suicide, it's homicide, and it's omnicide, which means killing the whole biosphere.
Yes, absolutely. And what you said, spirituality, I recognize that in the vaccination arena, where
yes.
Women in Africa would put a wooden stick, pointy wooden stick in the arms of their children, hopefully to mislead the whites who were going around with syringes with polio vaccines, because what they had noticed was that the children who had been vaccinated had lost their cosmic connection.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Is this a spiritual war? Yeah. Totally. I agree.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes, it
the
is.
same thing is being done with our food, like with
Yes.
substances like monosodium glutamate and aspartame, neotame, or whatever they want to call it. It's poison for the brain.
And also, the airport scanners. I was talking to.
Scanners. Yes, they break your DNA.
I was talking to Marian Falk, who is one of the last living Manhattan Project scientists, and he's mentored me since the year 2000 and trained me and educated me, and it's been a wonderful experience. It's like sitting under a tree for the day with Plato every time I go to see him. And of course, he made the hydrogen bomb work for the United States by solving all the problems on it. And Edward Teller, he laughs every time somebody refers to Edward Teller as the father of the hydrogen bomb, because it was Marian Falk. It's not the people we think it is, the public faces, that are given the credit. Usually they steal it. And the real people who really did it remain silent and unknown. But Marian said to me, I want all the information you can get on the airport scanners. And I said, okay. It's Chertoff, who is the Secretary of Homeland Security, who owns the companies. He said, no, it's not. And I said, what do you mean? He said, no, it has to be a very large company that has a long history of experimental research and producing technologies and products utilizing ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. And so he was on the phone, and I said, well, let me just sit down on my computer and do a little search. Desiree, who do you think the main company is producing these airport scanners that are giving horrible doses of ionizing radiation internally to very innocent people simply because they have the unfortunate experience to go to an airport in order to fly to another place? Who do you think the company is? It's in Holland, and it's called Philips Corporation. They are making the airport scanners that are going to cause, in pregnant women who are pregnant in their first month, 80% of the embryos will die. Going through an airport scanner. And this is before women even know they're pregnant.
Oh, my God.
And so these airport scanners, they're also using these in buildings, government buildings in Washington, D.C., where every single time you enter a building, an office building, you have to go through an X-ray scanner.
Well, it's like the history repeats itself. I remember that tests have been done in the U.S. in the 1950s at post office desks where you were going to buy stamps and you were irradiated with X-rays without your knowledge. Things like that.
See, that was experimenting.
Yeah, I know that happened. And what I remember myself is that in the shoe shop in 1950 something, 55, 56, there were these little machines, and it was fun to, as a kid, to see your own foot in this greenish light with the shoe around it, and then you could see whether it fit or not. And
I remember.
Yeah. So we never thought that would be detrimental to our health, because most people cannot fathom the idea that the government is not out for your best interest. They are not. It's the opposite. I call it, it's every day, it's opposite day. I borrowed that term from Patrick Jordan also. Every day
Yes.
is a perfect day. Because when you think it's one way, it turns out to be totally different. 180 degrees turnaround.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, Philips. Well, I'm going to dig into that one.
I was really surprised.
Yeah.
But you see, he's worked in this field for his whole life. And so he knows the scale
Yeah.
of the project, and he knows the players.
Yeah. Yeah, but Chertoff is certainly a player in the game because he is somewhere in between. And that is
But his mother was one of the first Mossad agents in Israel. She was Chertoff's mother.
Yeah.
She was part of the establishment that set up Israel, and she was actually a Mossad agent working as an airline stewardess on the Israeli El Al flight of the company. And she flew as a stewardess to Spain to pick up Sephardic Jewish children and bring them back to Israel. And the Israeli government had a contract with the U.S. government, and the U.S. government transported X-ray machines to Israel, and the Israelis X-rayed the heads and the brains of these Sephardic children to study the brain damage caused by the X-rays.
Yeah.
So the Israelis didn't want to do it to the Ashkenaz members, the children.
The Khazars, in other words, yeah.
Yes, the Khazars, but they were happy to do it to the true Jews who were part of a diaspora they were part of the Moorish occupation of Spain and Portugal. So it's just very, very, very interesting.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is also that the security companies on most airports are also Israeli.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But you have to remember the State of Israel, the Mossad, and the CIA were created by British intelligence, MI6. So they are the FBI, the CIA, the Mossad, they're all working for British intelligence. And they're controlled by British intelligence.
Yeah, and isn't that ultimately Rothschild?
It's the Queen.
Well.
It's really the Queen.
Yeah, but they're in cahoots with each other, yeah.
Well, they're agents of the sovereign of the British Isles.
Yeah. Yeah, and I found out in my research that there is a thing it's called the Club of the Isles.
Ah.
And that is also Elizabeth and the Crown of England.
Yeah.
They have everything that you can think of that is interesting. I mean, from foods to minerals to packaging to you name it. And all the big industrial names are in this non-official Club of the Isles. But it is there, and it's being orchestrated by the British Crown. Yeah.
You know, when I was hitchhiking around Europe and around the world, I did it for 10 years, and working as a scientist, I had the most wonderful time in Amsterdam. I stayed at the youth hostel. I loved Holland, I loved Amsterdam, and I wanted to see every square inch of it. So I volunteered in the morning to do chores in the youth hostel, and I got to stay there for free, and they fed me dinner. And I used to go to De Bijenkorf.
Yeah.
There's a restaurant there.
Yep.
I didn't go into the restaurant, but I just loved it, and I would go there and walk around the grounds and the gardens. And I used to see Queen Juliana riding her bicycle there. And how different the Queen Beatrice, her daughter, is,
Oh, yeah.
how haughty and arrogant and disdainful she is compared to Queen Juliana.
Yes. Yeah,
Very different.
it's absolutely, it's again opposite day, you could say. Yeah.
Yeah, very opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, one of the people I'm in contact with, he has a website for, or I should say, against radiation, electromagnetic radiation, and all sorts of things. And he has been very able to get FOIA requests in Holland.
Oh, yeah.
And so he did one FOIA request to ask about when there is a new law being, when Beatrix signs a new law into
Effect, yes.
effect, yes, then she is Queen Beatrix, by the grace of God. And then
Yes.
this guy asked, please explain to me which God that is.
Yes. Well, yes, go ahead and finish.
Well, when you know the background of these people, then this question is very legitimate.
It's very relevant because these people are not Christians, they are not Jews, they are not Muslims, and they are not Taoists or Buddhists.
No.
These people actually involved in this global disaster that is being perpetrated century after century actually worship the cult of Isis, which is
Yes.
the death cult from ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
And they have satanic practices. It's actually very, very interesting, and I really never knew anything about it until I came upon a book called Dope Incorporated.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to send that to you. I want you to post the PDF of that book on your site so that people can begin to understand what the bigger network, the bigger overarching organizational structure of the world is that we live in, and it's completely invisible. We have no awareness of it at all. And this is an underground economy that has 5 times more money in it circulating surreptitiously through offshore banks and so forth and so on. And for every dollar in circulation, there are $5 in this secret, much bigger economy. And it's based on drugs, arms trafficking, all kinds of sex trafficking, any kind of exploitation of humanity that is possible and perverted is part of that economy. The headquarters is in the British Isles. It's in England, and the original organizers were from Scotland, and they were a rogue group of monarchists who were actually they were Knights Templars from the period of the Crusades. And the Knights Templars were humanists. They believed in the self-determination or democracy for ordinary citizens. But this Scottish group hid this secret belief or support of monarchism, and they're the ones who were involved in developing the opium trade to take down the ancient culture and civilization in China. And they had approached the Chinese in the early 1700s because they wanted tea, which they could put taxes on and sell in Europe and in North America. They wanted silk and they wanted porcelain from China. And it was to make themselves very, very rich. Well, the Chinese said, well, we don't want to trade with you because we have everything we need. We've been here 5,000 years perfecting our manufacturing, And so you have to pay us in silver or gold. Well, the British didn't want to do that, and they said, okay, what we're going to do is start growing opium in the Himalayan foothills, and we will smuggle it into China and bribe their customs officials. And that's exactly what they did, and by the late 1800s, Desiree, 250 million people in China were addicted to opium. And then the Rothschilds wanted to build railroads in the United States, the western part of the U.S., to open up all of that virgin land for development and exploitation. And so they brought Chinese coolies or laborers to San Francisco, and they took them up into the mountains. They addicted them to opium. And so the coolies would work all day under horrendously dangerous conditions, and a lot of them died. And then they would spend their day's wages on opium that they bought from the railroad company, and they would smoke it all night. So basically the Rothschilds got the Western railroads for free.
Oh yeah, that's typical to do it that way. Well, there is a book that you will actually like then. I interviewed her, Dr. Nancy Turner Banks. She wrote a book, AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire.
Ooh!
Very interesting. I put the link in the chat for you.
Ooh!
Yes, and she, if you Google her name, or not Google, the other one, where you're not, your IP...
Oh, Amazon. Amazon?
Yeah, well, no, I was referring to a searching machine. I can't think.
Oh, Yahoo? Yahoo?
No, that's also someone that will... Here, start page, that is what I mean, yeah. They don't record your IP address. So, if you Google her name, Nancy T. Banks, and the name of the book, and she has done a couple of radio interviews that you can find on the internet also. You will love that. She will give you a background on what you just said also. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I know that you like that.
I love that. And by the way, I worked with an NGO in Amsterdam on the crash of the LL plane into the suburbs, and I discovered that the Israelis enter and leave at will, and they are not inspected or investigated at all at Schiphol Airport.
Yeah, Schiphol, yeah, I know. That's correct. Schiphol, yeah, that's correct. I know that. It's ludicrous. Yeah. And I remember hearing that plane. I was living outside of Amsterdam, and I remember hearing that plane coming over and noticing that it was a very strange noise that I heard. And then all of a sudden, 10 minutes later, we had on the television, there was the crash, and it was very strange because it was very nearby, but it was on television, so it could be a movie also. It was surreal. It was strange. It was, yeah. And then afterwards, I have been talking to a person here in Holland who has been very much involved with the whole thing. He was there as a airplane spotter, I think they call them, people who look at airplanes the whole time.
Yes, yes.
And he had made some pictures, and with these pictures he could prove that there was something wrong with this airplane. Something was not well aligned or something like that, but they made his life miserable.
I'm sure.
Trying to bring out the truth there, yeah.
Well, because that LL plane had been on in the United States picking up components, the chemical components, to make sarin gas. And they had illegally bought that in the United States. I think DuPont Chemical Company sold it to them. It had to all be covertly done. And also the ballast in the tail and in the wings of the plane was depleted uranium, which is used in commercial and military planes. and much like you use those lead lugs on tires to balance them.
Yeah.
So when that plane crashed, it not only did all of that, the chemical components burn up, but also the depleted uranium ballast also burned. And of course, the Dutch government did everything to conceal the truth, and they denied that people had been made ill or exposed to chemicals and radiation. And so I'm sure there's still a lot of people suffering the long-term effects from that disaster.
It still happens, yes, I know. And I heard also that helicopter blades are made from uranium, or
yes, they are.
Heavy uranium. So there was a helicopter that crashed in a university campus, and then the whole campus had to be evacuated.
That was in Okinawa. I was actually taken by professors when I went on a speaking tour in Okinawa, and they took me to that very campus. And I'm not sure if that's the accident you were talking about, but that helicopter crashed. It contaminated all the buildings and the campus and the people there. And the U.S. military took over the campus and hid this accident, and they forced the Japanese government to remove the building and, at their own cost, rebuild that campus building without any money supplied by the U.S. government. No responsibility at all.
Well, typical. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, about Fukushima, I want to go back to that, because people talk about 4 reactors, because there were 2 that were not working at the time, but that doesn't mean that there isn't radioactive materials present. So,
well, let's just quickly outline what happened there, because not everybody listening may know. On March 11th, a magnitude 9.1 earthquake occurred offshore from Fukushima, and there were 6 reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi plant, which is number 1, and there's also a second Fukushima plant a few miles away. And when that earthquake occurred, all of the electricity and the lines to provide electricity to the plant were damaged, and so no electricity, the regular power supply, was out of operation. Now, in a nuclear power plant, there are at least 2 backup systems, and the backup system, the diesel backup system that would generate electricity, is in the basement of each reactor building below or underneath the operating reactor. On top of the reactor are cooling ponds, which is where the spent fuel rods are removed by a crane from the reactor and placed in these cooling ponds, where water circulates to keep the temperature down, and until the radioactivity is diminished, it takes years, to a level where the rods can be removed from the water, the cooling pond, and placed in outdoor casks which sit on the ground, because no one has, Japan and the United States certainly do not have any repositories where nuclear materials can be safely put away out of danger and away from any way of contaminating or exposing the public. So when that earthquake occurred, there were 600,000 spent fuel rods in 7 cooling ponds, and I believe that 4 of the reactors were operating and 2, supposedly 5 and 6, were non-operational, but it turns out that there are very severe problems there too now. Now, 90 minutes after the cooling system has failed, the reactors go into meltdown. So the earthquake happened at 12:46 a.m. in the morning, in the middle of the night, on March 11th, right after midnight. And 1 hour later, a 31 or 32-foot tsunami wiped out the whole coastline, even inland, along maybe the top third or one-fourth of the eastern side of Japan. Now, these reactors are built on the ocean because they need huge amounts of water to pump through the plant every minute to keep the reactors cool and the spent fuel rods cool. So the tsunami flooded the basement, and the people who were, the workers who were in the plant when that tsunami happened and the earthquake happened, after the tsunami receded, they were unable to get the pump for the regular cooling system working, which is down on the beach, and they were unable to get the pumps in the basement, the backup diesel system, to work, and they then turned to the battery backup system, and they were unable to get that to work. And at that time, they did not know why. They were just desperate to get the cooling waters working. And it turns out about a week later that an article appeared in the Yomiuri newspaper in Tokyo, and that was set up by I think a former Navy officer, or he may have ties to the underground, but he set that newspaper up to promote nuclear power in Japan and to persuade the Japanese public to accept nuclear power. And so I thought that was interesting that the first mention of the Stuxnet virus appeared in that newspaper. Yeah. And I said, well, what is the Stuxnet virus? The Stuxnet virus, it turns out, is a virus, computer virus, that is introduced in a USB stick, which is that small external storage device that you can kind of wear on a string around your neck or put it in your purse or pocket or whatever.
USB stick, we call it, yeah.
USB stick, right. Or if an inspector or a person coming from an outside company comes in to do checks or whatever on inside the nuclear power plant, he can introduce that with a conventional worm virus that is just downloaded from his laptop into the operating system where it hides, and it's programmed to sabotage the operating system at a certain time in a certain way, and it can also be remotely controlled from satellites by, for instance, the NSA, the National Security Agency. Those are the satellite people in the United States government. And that's the highest level of intelligence. So I began really investigating after I saw a video clip, 10 minutes long, of a German scientist named, I think his name was Langner, and he was hired by Siemens to go and investigate what the Stuxnet virus was, and he reported in this interview during a TED conference, TED conference in Long Beach. This is just before the Fukushima earthquake happened. It's foreshadowing, actually. And what he said is that that virus had to be developed by an extremely advanced, very, very sophisticated team. He said, in fact, it had to have the sophistication of rocket science, and he said, and there's only one nation more likely to be able to do that. He meant the United States. He actually said it. So what I found, I spent a whole day with a friend of mine who's also a very good investigator. She's in Texas. I'm in California. We spent a whole day on Skype looking all over the internet for old news and looking for the trail, the Stuxnet trail. Well, it turns out the Stuxnet virus was developed by a team at the Idaho Nuclear Engineering Lab, which is part of the Department of Energy, with a Siemens team. So the German Siemens company that builds the controls in the nuclear power plants, the very controls that the Stuxnet virus was designed for, they were actually at the Idaho Nuclear Engineering Lab with an American team, and they wrote the virus together. It would be almost impossible for a U.S. team, even a CIA team, to write that virus without all of the intimate knowledge of the codes and everything, all of the software involved in those operating those controllers. So in June or July of 2010, last summer, that Stuxnet virus suddenly appeared, and it was probably developed in about 2007. It was introduced to the plant in Iran, Bushehr, or no, it was not Bushehr, it was Natanz. Bushehr is the reactor, the nuclear power plant, and Natanz is where they had the centrifuges to concentrate uranium for nuclear power plant fuel. And the Israelis and the Western powers have accused Iran of making nuclear bombs, but actually Kissinger gave nuclear power plants to Iran, and actually President Ford transferred plutonium, weapons-grade plutonium, to Iran. So the virus at Natanz was introduced probably by a USB stick and by an agent of the Mossad. The Mossad delivered the Stuxnet virus to Natanz, and the virus makes all of the dials and controls look like everything is operating normally in the control room, but the virus actually causes the centrifuges to spin faster and faster until they just flew apart and burned up. So I think they destroyed between 500 and 1,000 centrifuges with that little USB stick. Pretty clever warfare. But in September of 2010, just last fall, the MOX fuel was secretly introduced to the reactor in Unit 3. And already in 2002, the governor of Fukushima Prefecture and the GE inspector that I know had gone on television and exposed this MOX fuel as being very dangerous, and the safety track record of TEPCO was horrible. So the governor ruled that no MOX fuel could be used in any reactors in Fukushima. So when I began talking to Kei Sugaoka and explaining to him that there was MOX fuel in Unit 3, he said, "How in the hell did it get there? I made it illegal to have it in any reactors in that prefecture." Well, it turns out that the Stuxnet virus was discovered in 63 Japanese computers in October of 2010. And not long after that, an Israeli security company went into Fukushima and installed a new security system. And about a month after they left, the Fukushima earthquake happened, the failure of the cooling systems happened, and so they must have introduced the Stuxnet virus when they were setting up the security system.
Yeah.
And So what is so horrible about this is that this is, we can see now, it's a new form of global nuclear tectonic warfare that can happen in any nuclear power plant, in any technology that has a reactor. It can happen on military ships or submarines because they have that are nuclear powered. It can happen at any time remotely in any nuclear power plant in the world, and most of them, by the way, are in the northern hemisphere, where the strongest world economies and strongest countries are located. And I don't think this is going to be the last disaster that we see. The reason the Stuxnet virus is necessary is because power plants, conventional power plants, and nuclear power plants are off the grid, and they are also off of the internet, and that is to prevent sabotage such as the Stuxnet virus can cause.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is that the emergency response, since that disaster began, has resulted in prolonged exposure of not only the Japanese population, the Korean population, the Chinese population, but all of North America. And eventually in 1 year it'll be mixed globally in the global atmosphere. So we are faced with truly a horrifying, horrific disaster. And it's even worse because nuclear bombs injected their fission products high into the atmosphere, where 85% of that radiation is still up there. Only 15% was rained out or snowed out into the global environment. And we know what diseases resulted from that exposure. But now this is floating up from the ground into the lower troposphere, which is very dynamic. It's where all the storms and rain and snow and hurricanes and tornadoes and fog and moisture is circulating, and it's going to result in 95% of all of that huge amount of radiation being rained out into the environment in 2.5 months, Desiree. It's going to be a very, very acute exposure, not just to the human population, but to the fisheries and the oceans, to the food baskets of North America on the western side of that continent, and to the Japanese farmers and the Japanese people. Prime Minister Kan of Japan went on television and ordered the Japanese people to be patriotic and to eat the contaminated food from the northern third of Japan to support the farmers there.
Oh, gee.
And parallel to that, the U.S. President Obama, who is a CIA asset, took his family, his wife and children, to the southern hemisphere, where he remained for the first 3 weeks during the highest level of exposure. Governor Brown, the governor of California, has never said one word like Obama about the radiation danger, and the public health departments of every county in the United States sent letters to doctors in their counties on March 17th, ordering them not to provide iodine tablets to patients concerned about radiation exposure to their thyroids. The next day, March 18th, is when the huge amount of radiation exposure began arriving from the explosions in plants 1, 2, and 3. And just remember, plant 3 had plutonium also added as a component to their nuclear fuel, and that was the most energetic of the explosions because part of it was a nuclear explosion, some type of a nuclear explosion in the MOX fuel pool on the south side of the building, and that is still a very hot spot, which means there's no water in that pool, and those rods are continuing to melt down and to burn and to release radiation into the atmosphere.
Yes, there's this scientist from Fairwinds who explains all that on a YouTube film.
Yes.
About the explosion of number 3, that it looks different and what it can be and so forth, yeah. Well, I think the whole story comprised, this is plain malicious intent. And
absolutely.
Yeah, of an order we cannot fathom. I mean...
Yes, but let me read that quote again.
Yeah.
Revolutionary oligarchs who acquire total power and hate the people will use their power to kill the people and use force to bring them under their control. So who are these people? The IAEA, NATO, the ICRP, the WHO, all of these international agencies, the UN, that are involved or should be involved in emergency response are doing nothing. Well, who set those agencies up, and where are those agencies located? They're part of DOPE Incorporated.
Yeah.
They're serving the oligarchs.
Yes, yes. It pays to look into history. I know that from my own research in the medical arena, and here it's exactly the same. If you know who are the players, what is the history behind all this, then you can ask better questions also. And
like cui bono, who benefits?
Exactly, follow the money. Yeah, right. There is one aspect that I really want to discuss, and that is the aspect of chemtrails.
Yes.
Last year in Ghent, in Belgium, we had a conference about chemtrails, and there were a lot of people acting a bit funny about that. I mean, yeah, here you have these conspiracy theorists with their chemtrail stories and this, that, and the other. Well, you said something in one of the interviews that makes chemtrails far more important than even we thought. I mean, I knew it was to make a plasma and to bounce off wavelengths that HAARP is sending out and that sort of thing. But I think there is a connection between the BP disaster, where the helicopter deck had this big hole.
Yes.
And the Fukushima earthquake, or the Japanese earthquake, and the Chile earthquake, and Haiti, and all. These are not coincidences. These are not natural events. It's playing with natural energies, as you said.
Yes. And so some of the HAARP events that I've identified with Alfred Röver, and very soon I will have my own website, and all of these will be on the website, so people can watch the videos and listen to the interviews. I'll put your interview on also. That'll be really nice, and I hope some of it's in Dutch. But I call HAARP Zionist science. It's used for missile defense, communications disruption, subsurface mineral exploration, to create rogue waves. These are waves that are over 100 feet high, and 200 ocean cargo ships have disappeared in the last 20 years from these rogue waves. It's a good way to take out your competition. Tectonic events, weather modification, and mind control. Some of the events that Alfred and I certainly have identified are the 1995 Kobe, Japan earthquake, the 2005 Hurricane Katrina, also the 9/11 event in New York City, the 2006 Sumatra earthquake and tsunami, the 2007 Black Sea storm, which no one knows about, the 2007 Niigata, Japan earthquake, and that happened exactly on the other side of the island Honshu that Fukushima is located on, and that was the foreshadowing event for Fukushima. The 2008 Myanmar cyclone and the 2008 China earthquake. So how do chemtrails fit into these events? Let's go back to the nuclear bomb test period, 1952 to 1963. And I've always said, why in the world were all these bomb tests done? I mean, once you drop a bomb on a population and you know it works, why do you have to poison the whole world, confirming what the conclusion is from the first experiment, which was on the Japanese people, Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And what I discovered was a book called Drift Station. And this is about the extensive history of scientific exploration and data keeping in the Arctic by the Russians. The first Russian expedition, scientific expedition to the Arctic, was in 1898. And in the early 1930s, the Russians started putting manned stations with very advanced technology and equipment to study the science of the Arctic. And what they did is the Pacific Ocean enters the Arctic, between Alaska and Siberia, and it flows through the Arctic and exits in about 3 years later into the Atlantic and flows down towards Iceland and Europe. And so the Russians began establishing bases on large pieces of ice or ice flows that broke off of the icebergs on that part of the ocean at the entrance into the Pacific, or the Pacific entrance into the Arctic. And these ice flows were big enough for planes to land on because they were manned 12 months a year, and supplies had to be, and equipment had to be flown in and delivered to the scientists running the stations. So in 1945, or during World War II, the manned ice flows, that was disrupted, and after the war, the Russians started doing it again, and then in about 1952, the U.S., or even earlier than that, the U.S. started establishing these ice flow stations as well. And I learned that the U.S. and the Soviet were secretly doing the nuclear bomb tests in the Arctic area. The biggest bombs, the hydrogen bombs, were detonated there by the Russians, by the Soviets, because together they were studying the behavior of the upper atmosphere in order to weaponize it. And HAARP is the weaponization of the atmosphere and the manipulation of the Earth's magnetic field and the energy that is locked up in that part of the atmosphere. The only way they could study the Earth's magnetic field was to inject highly charged or radioactive particles high up into the Earth's magnetic field and the Van Allen belts. So the U.S. Navy detonated 2 bombs in the Van Allen belts. The Soviets detonated bombs, and together they shared that information. Now, in order to study the effects of HAARP, once they built the antennas and they began operations, and that would have been in the 60s, they needed a background, an even background, so that they could observe the experiments from satellites, but they needed something to cover the irregular surface of the Earth that would distract from their ability to study their experiments. So basically they put the chemtrails up there as like a piece of blank paper, white paper, so that they could observe what their experiments were doing. And that was, I think the chemtrails started in the late 1980s, sometime around then. So they were fully operational by then. And in the 1995, I believe, is when they officially turned on HAARP. but they'd already been experimenting with it. And something the Russians were doing was transmitting 2 beams of over-the-horizon radar from their large transmitters, the largest in the world. They have the 7 largest in the world. And they were crossing these beams over U.S. cities. And in the early 1970s, Medford, Oregon, suddenly had an epidemic of suicides. And a professor, just overnight, and so a professor investigated it and finally concluded with his team that it must be coming from a military base near Medford. So they went to the base, they met with the base commander, and he said, yeah, we know about that, but it's not coming from us, it's coming from the Soviets. Yeah. And that was the woodpecker signal, which is how they were able to develop the HAARP antenna.
Yeah, and wasn't it also that one of the missions to into space that got burned just after takeoff? That was also something like this.
Oh, the space shuttle.
Yeah.
That crashed in Texas.
Yeah, that was just after takeoff. Yeah.
Yes, an amateur photographer was taking a photo of it as it was entering the atmosphere over California, and he actually got photographs of a big, like a lightning beam. It was a directed energy weapon that hit the shuttle over California, and parts began flying off of it before it finally crashed in Texas. That was a HAARP event.
Yeah. Yeah.
And guess where it crashed? Palestine, Texas.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
So, so that is what that was one purpose for chemtrails. Now, I was investigating Sir Jimmy Goldsmith, who is intermarried. His family, the Goldsmiths and the Rothschilds, have intermarried since they came from Germany together to London and became bankers there. And Sir Jimmy Goldsmith discovered, he was a robber baron, he discovered that American forestry companies were amortizing or decreasing the value of the forest holdings that they had, timber holdings, until they were worth almost nothing. And that would be like the older something gets, you get less and less money for it from an insurance company if it's damaged because it's worth less. And so these timber companies were saving money on taxes by amortizing the timber, when in fact the timber was actually becoming more valuable as it got rarer and rarer and older. So he bought every timber company in the United States. And in the early 1990s, he decided he wanted to own the entire Newmont Mining Company, which is the biggest uranium and gold mining company in the world. So he traded all of the forest rights in one of these gentlemen's clubs in London over a poker game. Oh, yeah. And he traded it, probably with the Rothschilds, for 49.9% of Newmont. But he wanted the controlling interest, and they wouldn't sell it to him. So in disgust, he sold Newmont, but they kept all of the forest holdings in the United States. So what these chemtrails are doing is they have aluminum, they have particulates, they have barium, human blood cells have been found in them, many other chemicals and strange things. Even radioactive materials like thorium have been found, and plutonium in these chemtrails. So what is the purpose of these chemtrails? They're spraying them all over Brazil, all over Germany, all over the United States.
We have them here.
All over Canada, all over Holland, all over Europe, North America, South America. They're spraying them basically everywhere. So Why? Why are they spraying them in California, for instance? Well, what is happening is that the acid rain in our atmosphere now from the chemicals that are released from different manufacturing processes and other sources is interacting with the aluminum particulates and creating aluminum oxide, which is clay. And these tiny particles are coming down in the rain, and the trees and plants are uptaking nutrients and water through their roots, but they're getting plugged up by the clay particles from the chemtrails. And it is creating conditions that look like drought, and it's killing the forests, especially a high kill rate along the coastlines, because that's where the chemtrails are coming from. And that is the highest moisture. So how can you get the highest drought where the highest moisture is, for instance, in California, when the interior parts of California where the forests are have less drought stress and less drought appearance than the coastlines? So it has to be coming from chemtrails, and it's got to be something in the higher moisture content along the coastlines. Well, it turns out that Senator Dianne Feinstein, who's an agent for the Rothschilds and the City of London bankers, is promoting harvesting or cutting down these diseased trees now in our national forests and our public lands. The American public would never stand for that, but since they appear to be diseased and they appear to be a fire hazard, then the public is more willing to support it. But it's actually the Rothschilds manipulating public opinion in the United States, manipulating the environment with HAARP and the chemtrails so they can cut down all this valuable timber.
Yeah, it is incredible.
And it's all for profit. It's all for profit.
Yes,
and basically, British Petroleum has set this up. The Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu, who is a Rothschild Nobel Prize winner in science, that's a Rothschild-controlled prize, is directing General Electric, who built the reactors that are at Fukushima, and GE is controlling Stephen Chu and Coonan, who worked for BP in DOE, and GE is directing TEPCO. Together, DOE and TEPCO are responding to this disaster, and just to confirm that, a friend of mine, a Japanese activist, hacked a map that was released jointly by the Japanese government and by the Department of Energy. It's called a U.S. Department of Energy and Japan Government Joint Cesium Survey. They superimposed the Chernobyl disaster area over a map of northern Japan, and it's almost exactly the same area that's highly contaminated. And so he hacked the PDF of that map and found it has 2 layers. And on the top layer, the map was labeled Joint U.S.-Japan Survey. But on the under layer, which was the original base document and map, unchanged on the top layer, but the title on the under layer, the original base document, was labeled a U.S. Department of Energy document. So there we have the proof that the Department of Energy is feeding the Japanese government, or TEPCO, this information and controlling the direction and the response to the Fukushima disaster.
Yeah, and they did all their damnedest to make it into the biggest disaster possible, with delaying measures to save the reactors with the boron, and it took ages. It now leaks into the ground. I mean, like the BP disaster, they do all sorts of crazy things to make the disaster as big as possible.
As big as possible. And so very early on, within 2 or 3 days of the disaster, of the earthquake, Hillary Clinton announced that she was sending a plane loaded with boron to Japan, and that would be put on the around the reactor fuel to absorb the fast neutrons and to stop the fission from a runaway fission process or the melting of the fuel. And within about 20 minutes of her announcement from the State Department, there was a bigger announcement denying that, and it was never mentioned again. And then the Japanese government and TEPCO refused any help, any boron, any cement, and so they were directed to prolong and promote the intensity of this disaster, and now we see why. It's to deliberately poison the whole Pacific region, the North Pacific region, and all the people in those Pacific Rim countries who are already exposed to Fukushima radiation, but also they've poisoned the whole food basket of Japan, the whole food basket of North America and Hawaii. And why? Why? It's because the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers want to take over farming, providing the food in North America. Yeah. The Rockefellers have already been farming in Mexico for decades, and the Rothschilds want to bankrupt the Japanese and European farmers so that the food they're growing in India now for $1 a day for each Indian farmer is going to be sold at great profit to the European community and the Japanese community.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things I'd like to say. Here I hear the Club of the Isles again.
Yes.
For starters. And yes. What I see, there are more ways, but this definitely is a big one, to shrink the global food the amount of food that is available for the world. And the other thing that I would say is that I checked on the boron story, because I was writing this column, and after I had published it, I found an article where they pretended that the boron indeed had arrived. So they still
didn't put it on the reactors.
Yeah. Well, they said the boron was shipped, and there was even a picture of a plane where they loaded the boron on, and as if it has happened. And well, it's not for nothing that I call Miss Clinton Hitlery Clinton.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, President Clinton's mother was the illegitimate daughter of Governor Rockefeller of Arkansas.
Okay, now we understand a lot more.
And the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers love to have illegitimate children with sort of unknown women because they can then use them as Rockefeller moles or agents in political office, in strategic marriages, in corporations. And so there's a hidden network of Rockefellers and Rothschilds all over the world who don't carry the Rockefeller name or Rothschild name, but they operate in their interest. And Hitler was another illegitimate child of a German maid who worked on a Rothschild estate in Germany.
Yeah. You have any idea about the father of Bill Clinton?
Oh, he was a car salesman. The marriage ended up in a divorce. He was a slick talker, I can assure you. Probably an alcoholic.
Yeah. Well,
Clinton would. Oh, I have a good example of Clinton. This government investigator who investigates for Congress told me that Bill Clinton went to a public meeting with Gulf War veterans who were sick from depleted uranium exposure. And they were so sick. Clinton was there giving a talk, and one of the veterans asked him some questions about health care and so forth and so on. And Clinton said, well, my uncle was in the Gulf War or exposed to depleted uranium, and he started crying and said, I really understand what all of you are going through, and I'll do my best to alleviate, your problems with more medical care through the VA and more funding and so forth and so on. And so when his talk was over, he walked out, and one of his staffers ran up to him and said, Bill, why didn't you tell us you had an uncle in the war? We could have used that. And Clinton looked at him and threw his arms up in the air and said, what uncle? And he walked off laughing. He made it up.
Yeah.
So that's how glibly they lie.
Yeah. Well,
and deceive.
Yeah. Well, that's what they always do to get their way. Yeah. It's incredible.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we have been at it for 2.5 hours now.
Oh my gosh.
And I've loved every second of it. Yeah, well, maybe it's best that you come back sometime, Leuren. I would love that.
Thank you. I'd be really happy to.
Yeah. Is there one thing that you, in this show, absolutely want to say, to have said in public?
Yes.
Sign off.
What I want to say is that we've discussed the problem.
Yeah.
And I don't want to leave people feeling helpless and powerless. The point of this discussion and of going on the air with this information is really to educate and empower people and inspire them to find their own solutions to this. And one of the solutions that's very important is for people to take charge of their own health and make decisions that the normal medical profession probably would not support. But we need to find our own solutions and to build community globally and locally and share information and to support and love each other. We've become alienated and isolated because of capitalism, and we've lost what the answer is because it's right there between us. Together, we have to go through this. Together, we will find new solutions. We'll find new technologies and strategies and techniques to resolve these health issues and environmental issues that are resulting from this terrible exposure of the global community. And I believe that this answer lies in a new approach to medicine, and it's understanding the energy environment of our own bodies and how our bodies function as an electrical system of frequencies. Life is made possible in our bodies by information flow, and that's actually through the passage of infrared light, which carries messages throughout our body. Chemical reactions could never do it quickly enough. It's through light passing through our bodies. And I know Russians and Eastern Europeans have used light and used electrical transmissions at different frequencies to heal many diseases in bodies. It's a miracle to be able to do it like that, but it's wonderful. It's non-invasive, it's very inexpensive, and the recovery period is instant. You're not cut open from your the top of your neck to the bottom of your stomach with a long recovery period and a poor prognosis and all your reproductive organs removed. So there are foods, miso, soup, and there are treatments for diabetes, such as the root bark from certain plants, from the burdock root. I know I've talked to indigenous people all over the world and said, what plant do you use to reverse the effects of diabetes? Every tribe had them. It was the Hawaiians, the native Hawaiians, the Hopis, the Canadian Indians, the Japanese indigenous people, the Ainu. And so there are herbs and medicinals that grow in the woods, that grow within half a mile of where we live, that can solve a lot of these health problems. And everybody in the Northern Hemisphere should be taking iodine supplements now. You can use seaweed. You can buy it in health food stores. You can use iodine drops. They're available. You can order them through a pharmacy or on the internet. You can take iodine tincture, which you put on children's cuts on their hands, and just rub that on the skin on your neck, between your Adam's apple and your collarbone, and that goes straight through the skin into the thyroid and floods it with non-radioactive iodine, so that your thyroid does not need to uptake radioactive iodine, which damages it. You can rub povidone iodine ointment, 10%. It's $2.50 for a 1-ounce tube that'll last you for months. You just rub it on your skin, on your stomach, or anywhere on your body, and it goes right through your skin into flood your thyroid. And also, all cells in your body utilize iodine. So why are Americans so undernourished in iodine? We're depleted by 50% of iodine in our bodies over the last 30 years compared to 30 years ago, and the Japanese have 100 times more iodine in their diet than we do, and they're much healthier than we are. So together we need to form physical communities, but also spiritual communities to change the world we live in. And what is happening now is it's collapsing and breaking down. And the Chinese kanji symbol, or chop, character for disaster is the same character that means opportunity. So we're in a disaster. It's a transition that we can make into an opportunity. And I know together, if we share our experiences, if we share what we know that works, if we share our remedies and our food solutions, then we will all come out of this much better off than before this happened.
Yes, thank you, Leuren. I agree totally. And there is, I don't believe in coincidences. I'm preparing a lecture on the medicine of light. And I've just led a conference with Professor Korotkov, who has made a gas discharge visualization camera, and you put your fingertips in the slot, and then he can make an image of your aura and of your chakras, and he can pinpoint which area of the body is weak and getting sick maybe. And that sort of technologies are on the market, coming on the market right now. And I'm very excited to have this lecture Saturday in Holland about that. It's amazing what you can do with light and with biophotons, and there are wonderful instruments that have been made to work with that. And also, what I notice is that our own spirit, our own mind, our own thoughts can heal us or break us. So if you pay attention to what you are thinking, and if you have negative thoughts, stop and rephrase and make it a positive thought. That is very helpful, because all your cells will go with that flow, whether it's negative or positive. So it better be positive in that case.
Desiree, do you know what Ernest Sternglass, Dr. Ernest Sternglass, who helped to convince the Senate for President Kennedy to ratify the Partial Test Ban Treaty and end nuclear bomb tests. He and Marion Falk, the American scientists, Manhattan Project scientists, who made the hydrogen bomb work, do you know what both of them told me? They both told me, our bodies are just light. Our bodies are made of photons.
Yes.
And so, of course, the light treatment will work to restore our photons to the right frequency.
Yeah.
For perfect health.
Yeah. I have seen pictures and I have experienced the biophoton machine, and it's amazing. You can feel that your cells are sort of taking it in. Give me more, like that. It's amazing. And I'm taking sun baths now because
oh, good.
Yeah, when in the afternoon the sun is shining right on my bed, so I open the window and I lay down on my bed and I take a sun bath. And I can feel also then that my cells are welcoming the biophotons from the sun.
I know, I've had that same feeling. I wondered why it felt so good to lie in the sun.
Yeah, well,
of course.
And I will tell you, I had stubbed my toe tremendously on a stone step, and I really couldn't walk. And I put myself down in the sun and I said to my toe, listen, darling, take in all the photons you need. And I yeah, I really did. And I put some extra lavender oil on my toe.
Oh.
And I could not walk, I tell you. I could not use that foot. And 2 days later, I could use the foot, I could wear my shoes, nothing was left from me.
That's very interesting, because what I noticed, the whole electrical grid in the United States, in our homes, in our light bulbs, in all of our electronic things, they're all weaponized.
Yep.
And they emit electromagnetic frequencies that alter our biological electrical environment. And what I noticed is when I take a spray bottle of water with some lavender essential oil, a few drops in that bottle, and I spray that in the room, it blocks that EMF interference. And it also makes the room smell really good.
Yeah. Oh, I work a lot with essential oils, and especially with lavender. It's wonderful.
It is very powerful medicine.
I think it has to wait till next time, but I have this instrument here where you can make it's a light noise detector. So what you see as light, you can hear as noise.
Oh.
That's amazing, and we'll see whether it works.
I want one.
This is, you hear that?
Yes.
This is a buzz from a little halogen lamp, but this is the sound from my Apple screen.
Oh, and you know what you could do? You can buy a cheap transistor radio. Here in the United States, you buy them at Radio Shack, and they're about $12 or $14. They have an antenna on it, and the Manhattan Project scientist took me around the house, and he put it under light bulbs, and you could see how they were directing beams out of the light bulb because the antenna would only pick it up on a straight line where it was being transmitted out of the bulb. And then he took me to the dimmer switch. You know, you can have a chandelier hanging over a table, and if you go over to the wall where the dimmer switch is and you turn it up and down, there's a roaring noise on that radio. It's picking up the electromagnetic static from the the dimmer switch and the light bulb. And then he took me outside to the smart meter that was on the wall. We now have smart meters going on to people's electricity meter all over California. Everybody's fighting it. And of course, they're controlled remotely by radio transmissions, so they can run the electrical use up higher than your actual use and increase your billing. And an Indonesian friend of mine said, oh, we've had those in Indonesia for 10 years, but he said there's always a remedy to their scams. We have devices now that you can buy that you run the electricity backwards in the meter.
Yes, we want one of those, of course. Yes.
And cheat the electricity company the way they're trying to cheat you. Oh, it's so funny.
Yeah, well.
So just like that, there's always a way for us to counteract this. So we must work together. We must be a spiritual community, and we must reestablish a physical community, because these distractions, the television and the computer and the cell phones, are taking us away from our own reality. We're living in a virtual world that is not real at all, and it's making us starve to death and to become poverty victims.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, I so agree that we have to connect in a physical and a spiritual way with each other and form communities and let love, because love is the highest, unconditional love is the highest frequency there is. And these psychopaths can do nothing with that. So that is where we have to put our focus on, and maybe some vitamin C here and there, and iodine and seaweed and kelp and that sort of thing to help ourselves to get through this disaster.
Yes. And when the stress is very great, the best thing to do is to go out into the woods or into nature and just walk for an hour or half an hour, and take your children with you, because nature makes you feel safe and it restores your spirituality. It's being detached from nature that destroys our spirituality. We need to be connected to nature. We're part of nature, and nature is part of us. And when you detach from nature, you become alienated and isolated, and that's actually how these sociopaths and psychopaths are able to destroy all living things. It's because they're detached from themselves, because they're detached from nature.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, Leuren, you have to come back.
I have to come back. I would love to come back.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. And
Desiree, what I would like to say is to thank you so much for presenting the truth, for standing behind the truth, and for standing up in the wind. Because I know the wind is not always blowing on your back and pushing you forward. I know that sometimes it's negative too, and trying to hold you back. But you're a unique person. You have, you're like another light, another small lamp going on around the world. And if we keep waking up and becoming empowered and reaching out and opposing this darkness, we can overcome it. And you're a great light spot and a great inspiration, and you're doing a great service to the people of the Netherlands.
Oh, thank you, Leuren. Yes, that is where I'm coming from. That's my goal, indeed. And I feel, how you say that, like we are kindred spirits. I know so well what you are doing, and you can see so well what I am doing, because we are basically doing the same thing.
Yes, and I'd like to thank, is it Hans?
Yes.
Yes, Hans. I'd like to thank Hans, because he's behind the scenes making this interview possible, and he's done a great job. And I guess we couldn't do this without him. So thank you, Hans.
Yes, thank you, Hans. You take the words from my mouth, so to speak, Leuren. Yes, Hans is always in the background, always supportive, and not only in the technical sense of the word. So, well, that's 2.5 hours, no, almost 3 hours of radio.
Thank you so much. It was really fun.
Yes, it was. Okay, Leuren, thank you. Hans, thank you. Listeners, thank you. Till next time, this is Röver with Healthy and Well on argusoogrradio.org.